Not sure if you've heard of this, but you can actually run AI models right in your browser. As in, like, you can deploy an app that runs AI models on users' computer in the browser. Not only is this great for users in terms of their data privacy, it's great for you as developers, so you don't need to create that extra infrastructure just to have an AI inference endpoint. So in this video, I'm actually going to be showing you how to create this really neat little tool that removes background from images. All the data is local, the model is running locally. Yeah, nothing's being sent to the server. So let's just get into it. Here I have a really simple one-page Next.js setup. There's nothing special here, just a input and a image display. So if I run this now, right here, just choose a picture. I choose one. Yeah, I know it's my attempt at making more thumbnail faces. Please don't leave any comments about it. Thank you. Anyway, the first thing you're going to want to do is create this background removal pipeline.ts file. In here, we're going to define our image background removal pipeline using the model from Hugging Face Hub. Let's go ahead and start by creating a class. And the class is going to be called the background removal pipeline. It's going to have one member, which is a static instance of the pipeline itself. Next, let's go ahead and create the getInstance method, which will take in a progress callback, and we'll be using this progress callback later. Basically, when the model is processing, it's going to call this and tell you what the progress is in terms of how far along it has processed the image. We're going to check that the instance it has not been assigned, and if it has not, then we're going to assign it to pipeline. This pipeline is from the Hugging Face transformers library, and basically it's going to handle downloading the model and passing all the data it needs into the model for us. Inside this pipeline, we're going to set the task to image segmentation. That's exactly what we're doing when we're segmenting the image, basically removing the background. And then the model that we're going to be using is Bria AI Remove Background 1.4. And how I found this model was I just used the Hugging Face Hub. If you are ever looking for a specific task, Hugging Face will have it somewhere, or you can find a model that does similar to the task that you want and then fine tune it from there. It's relatively simple, the fine tuning process, as long as you have the data for it. And then the last argument this takes is optional parameter, which is the progress callback. Okay. Great, let's use this image pipeline right now. But before we do that, we're gonna have to create a hook to be able to use it, right? So let's go ahead and create a hooks folder. And inside the hooks folder, we're gonna create a use background removal.ts file. And in here, we're gonna define export default function use thank you. This hook is gonna grow in size significantly, but let's just start small first. And to do that, we're gonna go ahead and add a used effect in here. This is where we're gonna call our pipeline. Make sure you are passing the image URL into the use background removal hook. Make sure it can be string or null. We're gonna check that it is not null. Then we're gonna create a async function. And in here, we're going to grab the pipeline instance, because remember that the get instance is returning a promise unknown. Unfortunately, we cannot type that here, or maybe I'm missing something, but every time I tried, it's always given me linter errors. So I'm just gonna have to define the type here. Next, we're gonna then pass our image URL straight into the pipeline, which will return the output. Before we display the output as an image, let's go ahead and console log out the output to see exactly the data structure that we're getting back from the model. And lastly, we'll just call process image. Make sure that the image URL is inside the dependency array of the use effect. Now let's go ahead and use this use removal background. Going back to the page.tsx, at the top here, we're just going to go ahead and call the use background removal and pass in here the image string. Okay, let's go and choose my terrible thumbnail face. And we're waiting. As you can see that we get back an array of some kind of data object. And it includes a mask, which then contains the data, which is basically a bunch of numbers, which will be relevant later when we need to apply it to our image. You'll see that in a bit. Make this a little easier to understand by passing in a progress callback. At least this way we can see like what's happening rather than waiting and not seeing anything moving. So let's go back here, refresh the page. I'm gonna select the same image again, and you can see that now we get a bunch of message printing out. All right, let's go ahead and display this output on the screen as an image. And to do that, we need to store the image somewhere and then pass it into the image component as a URL. So therefore, let's go ahead and create this image URL state, which we're going to be returning from this hook. Obviously, we're not storing anything inside the URL currently, so let's get into that. I'm going to simply create a canvas and then basically draw the image on the canvas, convert the canvas into a blob, then create a URL that links to that blob, and then pass that into an image component. We're going to need the image mask first. So we're going to grab the raw image mask from the output. We're going to create a canvas, grab the width and the height from the raw image mask, and use that to set the canvas width and height. Now that we have our canvas as the drawing board, let's grab our pen. So that's going to be the context. We're just going to get the 2D context, make sure that it's not null, and then we're going to get the RGB values from the mask. And this is going to be important because we're going to be looping through every pixel inside the raw image mask. And then we're going to assign the RGB values, whether it's going to be black or white, depending on the mask. Black will represent the background of the image, white will represent the foreground of the image that is retained from the original image. Create image data from the RGBA values, make sure to set the width and height. Then we're going to draw that image straight onto the canvas using the context. We're going to convert the canvas into a blob, create the URL object from the blob, and then set our image URL state. Back in the page.tsx file, we're going to grab the image, the background removed image URL from our use background removal hook. And then we're just going to display the image using the Next.js image component. Now we are displaying the masked image here. You may notice that it does take some time for the image to be processed, and this process actually blocks the UI. Don't worry, we're going to go over optimization later in the video so that when the model is processing, it does not block the UI main thread. Displaying the black and white masks image is good and all, but doesn't do anything. So let's go ahead and work on actually displaying the image with the background removed. In order to do that, I'm just going to go and quickly add return mask here and set it to Boolean. This way I don't need to remove this logic right here, and I can just wrap it all in an if statement. If return mask, if it's false, we're going to return the actual image with the background removed, but if it's true, we're going to draw the mask like we have been. In order to apply the mask to the image, we're going to create an image element, which then we're going to pass it to the context to draw it on the canvas. After we draw it on the canvas, we're going to then apply the mask and make sure to set the cross origin to anonymous just to avoid cross origin issues. Once the image loads, we're going to draw it, get the image data from the context, grab the actual data array of the image, and as well as the pixel count. We're going to iterate through all the pixels in the image and apply the mask to the original image data. We're then going to apply the image data back onto the canvas. We're then going to convert the canvas to a blob again, create a URL object from the blob, and then set the state to the new URL. Oh, wow, that was a lot. Almost there. So one last thing we need to add is setting the original image source. So it will trigger the onload callback. Okay, go back to page.tsx file, make sure to set the second argument to false on the hook, and then we can load up the web page again, and then select an image, wait for the image to process, and there you have it, an image without the background. Now, you may have noticed, as I mentioned before, this process blocks the UI thread, which is a terrible experience for your users. How do we fix this problem? The answer is using a worker thread, and I'm going to show you how to implement that. I promise it's not that much code. It's just a few changes, and then you're done. The first optimization that we can make is setting the device and type to WebGPU and floating point 32 inside our background removal pipeline class. We can test this out immediately, and you'll notice that the processing is already much faster after the first time. Don't worry about it will all still work. This is just like a runtime error thing from the model, and this will go away once we move the model onto a separate thread. Let's say we move this whole background removal pipeline onto a separate node worker thread. We need to enable some kind of messaging system, so we're able to communicate between the main thread, which is running the UI, and this worker thread, which is running the background removal process. Here, we're going to simply add an event listener on message, grab the instance of the image pipeline to grab the image URL from the message that we send to this worker thread, which is the background removal pipeline thread, and pass that into our image pipeline. We're going to grab that output and send it back to the main thread. Fix up the linter errors, and make sure you have set the environment.allow local models to true. Back in the use background removal.ts file, we're going to add a few ref and states. So the first thing we're going to add is the worker. We're going to initialize our worker in a use effect in this hook. And then we're going to need a state to store the output result. And instead of passing in the image URL, we're going to store the image URL in a ref as well. And then what's going to be returned from this use background removal is a function that we can call in our component to trigger and send the image URL to the worker thread. I'm just going to quickly fix up this linter error, and then I'm just going to get rid of this image URL prop right here. Okay. Before I fix up this linter error right here, let's go ahead and initialize our worker. And to do that, I'm going to add another use effect in here. Check that the worker is not already initialized. If it's not, then initialize the worker. We're going to create an onMessageReceive callback function. All we really need to take care of is the complete status when it returns to us. You can do more error handling, but for this example, and also to keep this video as short as possible, I'm just doing this. And then we just add the event listener to the worker. So let's fix up this image URL. We don't actually need this pipeline anymore, so that can go. Goodbye. Same with this. Goodbye. And instead of just the image URL, we need to do .current because this is now a ref. And this will be equivalent to our result. And we're going to have to check in here if result, then return. Okay, this looks good. And then down here again, we need to make sure that this is sent to image.current. And it's not going to be null. And then we just set this to result instead of image URL. Great, now that we have the worker going in this hook, we actually need a way to trigger it, and that is going to be creating a remove background function that we're going to return out of this hook. Inside this function, we're just going to check that the worker is initialized before sending the image URL to it, and then we also make sure to set the image URL ref to the URL that we are passing to the worker. And then we obviously return this function so it can be called at your leisure. Back in the page.tsx file, we're just going to fix up the argument that the hook takes. We're also going to make sure that we are destructing the remove background function out of it. Moving down to our file here, I'm going to create a new const URL variable and set it to URL.create object URL and pass in file. In here, I'm going to set it to URL, and we're going to call remove background URL in here. Go to the web page that we have been working on, and let's set there we go. It works, and there is no errors here. You'll notice that there's still some warnings, some runtime errors here, but this I found hasn't caused any issues. And honestly, this is so fast in terms of removing background. It's almost instant.